Chapter 2. West Point Graduation. In the winter of 1838-9, I was attending school at Ripley, only 10 miles distant from Georgetown, but spent the Christmas holidays at home. During this vacation, my father received a letter from the Honorable Thomas Morris, then United States Senator from Ohio. When he read it, he said to me, "Ulysses, I believe you are going to receive the appointment." "What appointment?" I inquired. "To West Point. I have applied for it." "But I won't go," I said. He said he thought I would, and I thought so too, if he did. I really had no objection to going to West Point, except that I had a very exalted idea of the acquirements necessary to get through. I did not believe I possessed them, and could not bear the idea of failing. There had been 4 boys from our village, or its immediate neighborhood, who had been graduated from West Point, and never a failure of any one appointed from Georgetown, except in the case of the one whose place I was to take. He was the son of Dr. Bailey, our nearest and most intimate neighbor. Young Bailey had been appointed in 1837. Finding before the January examination following that he could not pass, he resigned and went to a private school and remained there until the following year, when he was reappointed. Before the next examination, he was dismissed. Dr. Bailey was a proud and sensitive man, and felt the failure of his son so keenly that he forbade his return home. There were no telegraphs in those days to disseminate news rapidly, no railroads west of the Alleghenies, and but few east, and above all, there were no reporters prying into other people's private affairs. Consequently, it did not become generally known that there was a vacancy at West Point from our district until I was appointed. I presume Mrs. Bailey confided to my mother the fact that Bartlett had been dismissed and that the doctor had forbidden his son's return home. You are listening this book at VolantLife Radio. The Honorable Thomas L. Hamer, one of the ablest men Ohio ever produced, was our member of Congress at the time and had the right of nomination. He and my father had been members of the same debating society, where they were generally pitted on opposite sides, and intimate personal friends from their early manhood up to a few years before. In politics they differed. Hamer was a lifelong Democrat, while my father was a Whig. They had a warm discussion, which finally became angry, over some act of President Jackson, the removal of the deposit of public moneys, I think, after which they never spoke until after my appointment. I know both of them felt badly over this estrangement and would have been glad at any time to come to a reconciliation, but neither would make the advance. Under these circumstances, my father would not write to Hamer for the appointment, but he wrote to Thomas Morris, United States Senator from Ohio, informing him that there was a vacancy at West Point from our district, and that he would be glad if I could be appointed to fill it. This letter, I presume, was turned over to Mr. Hamer, and, as there was no other applicant, he cheerfully appointed me. This healed the breach between the two, never after reopened. Besides the argument used by my father in favor of my going to West Point, that he thought I would go, there was another very strong inducement. I had always a great desire to travel. I was already the best traveled boy in Georgetown, except the sons of one man, John Walker, who had emigrated to Texas with his family and immigrated back as soon as he could get the means to do so. In his short stay in Texas, He acquired a very different opinion of the country from what one would form going there now. I had been east to Wheeling, Virginia, and north to the Western Reserve, in Ohio, west to Louisville, and south to Bourbon County, Kentucky, besides having driven or ridden pretty much over the whole country within 50 miles of home. Going to West Point would give me the opportunity of visiting the two great cities of the continent, Philadelphia and New York. This was enough. When these places were visited, I would have been glad to have had a steamboat or railroad collision or any other accident happen by which I might have received a temporary injury sufficient to make me ineligible for a time to enter the academy. Nothing of the kind occurred, and I had to face the music. Georgetown has a remarkable record for a Western village. It is, and has been from its earliest existence, a democratic town. There was probably no time during the rebellion when, if the opportunity could have been afforded, it would not have voted for Jefferson Davis for President of the United States over Mr. Lincoln or any other representative of his party, unless it was immediately after some of John Morgan's men, in his celebrated raid through Ohio, spent a few hours in the village. The rebels helped themselves to whatever they could find: horses, boots, and shoes, especially horses, and many ordered meals to be prepared for them by the families. This was no doubt a far pleasanter duty for some families than it would have been to render a like service for Union soldiers. The line between the rebel and Union element in Georgetown was so marked that it led to divisions even in the churches. There were churches in that part of Ohio where treason was preached regularly and where, to secure membership, hostility to the government, to the war, and to the liberation of the slaves was far more essential than a belief in the authenticity or credibility of the Bible. There were men in Georgetown who filled all the requirements for membership in these churches. Yet this far-off Western village, with a population, including old and young, male and female, of about 1,000, about enough for the organization of a single regiment if all had been men capable of bearing arms, furnished the Union Army for general officers and 1 colonel, West Point graduates, and 9 generals and field officers of volunteers that I can think of. Of the graduates from West Point, all had citizenship elsewhere at the breaking out of the rebellion, except possibly General A. V. Couts, who had remained in the Army from his graduation. 2 of the colonels also entered the service from other localities. The other 7, General McGrearty, Colonels White, Fife, Loudon, and Marshall, Majors King, and Bailey, were all residents of Georgetown when the war broke out, and all of them who were alive at the close returned there. Major Bailey was the cadet who had preceded me at West Point. He was killed in West Virginia in his first engagement. As far as I know, every boy who has entered West Point from that village since my time has been graduated. I took passage on a steamer at Ripley, Ohio, for Pittsburgh about the middle of May, 1839. Western boats at that day did not make regular trips at stated times, but would stop anywhere and for any length of time for passengers or freight. I have myself been detained 2 or 3 days at a place after steam was up, the gangplanks, all but one, drawn in, and after the time advertised for starting had expired. On this occasion, we had no vexatious delays, and in about 3 days, Pittsburgh was reached. From Pittsburgh, I chose passage by the canal to Harrisburg rather than by the more expeditious stage. This gave a better opportunity of enjoying the fine scenery of western Pennsylvania, and I had rather a dread of reaching my destination at all. At that time, the canal was much patronized by travelers, and, with the comfortable packets of the period, no mode of conveyance could be more pleasant when time was not an object. From Harrisburg to Philadelphia, there was a railroad, the first I had ever seen, except the one on which I had just crossed the summit of the Allegheny Mountains, and over which canal boats were transported. In traveling by the road from Harrisburg, I thought the perfection of rapid transit had been reached. We traveled at least 18 miles an hour when at full speed, and made the whole distance averaging probably as much as 12 miles an hour. This seemed like annihilating space. I stopped 5 days in Philadelphia, saw about every street in the city, attended the theater, visited Girard College, which was then in course of construction, and got reprimanded from home afterwards for dallying by the way so long. My sojourn in New York was shorter, but long enough to enable me to see the city very well. I reported at West Point on the 30th or 31st of May, and about 2 weeks later passed my examination for admission without difficulty, very much to my surprise.